Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This week, a show I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Batman Caped Crusader, Season 1, Episode 6. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. I didn't know, because the title of the episode, I didn't know the title of the episode, but this is the episode written by Mark Bernardin, so I was like, because I remember him talking about it in the most recent Fat Man Beyond, about like, oh yeah, like he said he did the Gentleman Ghost episode, so anyway, I just thought that was pretty cool. I was like, Mark! But either way, what I think it's so interesting with this episode that we are now dabbling in the more supernatural side of the DC universe. Because at first I was thinking like, oh, it's interesting. Like we've only stayed really grounded so far, but then I was like, all right, I forgot. Episode 2 was Clayface. But to be fair, that's like the more science fictional side of things. So it's like for the most part, we got every other villain being grounded, except for now we got like two oddballs. It's like, you know, showcasing the DC like rogues gallery, especially Batman's rogues gallery. But yeah, this is because it's so interesting because it is so supernatural, it kind of tosses you for a second, or at least makes me question it for a second, because I'm like, oh yeah, like I guess because it's like, because the movies have kept things so grounded, you don't really dabble in like the weirdos in Batman's rogues gallery. Mainly the movies haven't done that in a while, but the TV show stuff, whether it's like a Gotham or a Batwoman, have not shied away from like the like weird side of like the rogues gallery. But either way, it's so weird, and I don't mean this as a slight, but it felt kind of Scooby-Doo-ish, and maybe that is seen as a slight. I don't mean it to be one, but it kind of felt like, oh, like a Scooby-Doo villain you'd unmask to find out, oh my god, it's some person, which Bruce is coming at it from that perspective because he doesn't believe in the supernatural. He's just kind of like, oh, ghost, I don't believe in that nonsense. But it's also interesting because like both Lucius and Alfred do, and even Alfred's perspective is it's Gotham, so of course I'm going to believe in ghosts. Because he also talks about like someone in his family, there was a ghost situation with someone related in his family, like his uncle or whatever. Which I even love. Bruce is like, I don't know what's more interesting. The fact is that that Alfred believes in ghosts, or that fact is you both get along. Which I love. Lucius uses that as a shot against Bruce, being like, yo, it's because I've always been taught to be nice to people, Bruce, even to help. Something you should take a lesson from. It's like, yeah, he hasn't been the nicest because he's been fairly like, he listens to Alfred, but he's also been really dismissive of Alfred. I am curious to see if this episode kind of is a turning point, just like because he's been very cold and distant toward Alfred. He hasn't said it, but it's practically within, shut up, Alfred. Are you crazy, Alfred? Like, he's never like had the more. Because I don't know. I think it's a situation where maybe Bruce, where he is right now at this point in his story, hasn't really kind of realized how. He realizes how important Alfred is, but I don't think he realizes just how important. But either way. But yeah, not believing in ghosts, because it's Gentleman Ghost. Because at first, he seems like a gentleman to some extent. But he robs places, but then you find out like, oh, he's robbing, well, why not any other truck? Why this particular truck, even though this truck has like the least amount of money? And then when he's on a train later, he doesn't take Harvey's money, but he takes money from everyone else on the train. And so I'm like, oh, he's an inverse Robin Hood. It's like, instead of stealing from the rich and giving to the poor, it's like, I'm gonna steal from the rich and give to myself, because we find out about the Craddock family. I'm not well versed in all of the families that have been the founding families of Gotham. It is always an interesting storyline. I don't know if that's always tied to the Court of Owls, because the Court of Owls typically are associated with the founding of the Gotham, but I don't know if that always fully equates the founding families and the Court of Owls. I don't know if that's always connected together. I think it seems like it is, but maybe that's my mistake. There's been a few adaptations of the Court of Owls more recently and stuff, so. But it's like, I don't really know the founding families other than the Waynes. I don't really know them that well, so the Craddock name, I don't know if that's one of the names that typically gets brought up, or is it because, like they said, that name's kind of been buried and kind of removed because the gentleman ghost who he really was. It's like, yeah, he was kind of a douchebag. He was from a prominent family, but he was also a gambler. And basically, he blamed democracy for his unfortune. So he became a thief and would steal from the rich and give to himself. And now, as a ghost, he's still doing the same thing. I was like, man, you got to be a really despicable person. I mean, he's stuck in his way of view of things. And I think it feels like, and with the context of this episode being what it is, it feels like I could see a lot of Mark Bernardin's Mark's sensibilities in what he would want to write from a storytelling perspective. I don't know how much free reign he got when it came to this story, but when you take a lot of elements of the Gentleman's Ghost perspective of just kind of like how disgusted he was by the way that Gotham is now. Like, it's not like Gotham's great, but he's like, oh, the poor don't know where they belong. Like, the lower class should stay where they are. And he's trying to, keep the higher class where they are. So, it's so interesting that he was even going to let Bruce go. But he let Bruce go the second time because he's like, hey, I can actually tell by the way you fight you're an upper class man. Does not mean I'm going to let you get away a third time. So, kind of take this as a warning and bounce. So, I just think that's so fascinating. But like I said, it plays into some of the sensibilities. I feel like the stories that Mark wants to tell, so it just feels so in line. But maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I feel that because even the character being like, let me guess, you're gonna tell me some bullcrap like all men are created equal. He even in his time he views. Because he even made some wisecrack to Lucius, and Lucius was like, yo, don't call me names or something like that. Because he said something that could be like, yeah, that felt loaded when he said it. It was like, wasn't outwardly racist, but you could feel a twinge of racism to it. Which, speaking on, really quickly, I should also note, I kept thinking the Gentleman Ghost, his voice sounded familiar. It's Toby Stevens. I thought, that's dope. The thing I best know him for is in the Lost in Space reboot on Netflix. He was Papa Robinson. So I thought that was dope. This episode also gave me some interesting things to kind of think about in the grand context of this continuity. First and foremost, like episode 2 hinting Lucius is just his lawyer. Now, I want to look that up really quickly and find out if that was Lucius's role even in his first created situation in the comics or not. So after just a quick Google search, it does seem like Lucius's role, just from like I said, a quick search I saw, does seem like his role is what it typically is in most adaptations of I kind of help with the equipment and supplying you with stuff for you doing Batman stuff. So for him to be not associated with that, could always be eventually he becomes that, he plays that role for Batman. Because he even talks about we could use some of that money from that secret account. And he's like, oh yeah, that's kind of my dual with whatever money. And Lucius I probably don't want to know what you do with that money, do I? He's like, no, you do not. Which is so, that's so interesting for Lucius to not have any idea or to be associated in that capacity. I don't know if he does anything beyond just being kind of maybe it's not just Bruce's personal lawyer, but the Wayne Enterprises in general, which is something I've brought up too, where I was like, we haven't touched on that side of things, because we haven't, other than his Playboy angle, we haven't really gotten an opportunity to see the other facets of Bruce, that's why I'm kind of getting the feeling maybe we are kind of going a little Robert Pattinson with this, where it's whereas Robert Pattinson hadn't created the Playboy persona yet, this particular Bruce has, but he hasn't gone beyond that. We don't know if he does any very helpful philanthropic ventures, I guess is the wording. I don't think that's the word I'm looking for, but you get what I'm saying. He hasn't really done a lot to help Gotham that we're aware of. Maybe he has and we're just not covered it, but the fact is that's fundamental to Bruce. But like I said, he thinks he probably does a lot more for Gotham as Batman than he can as Bruce Wayne. So I don't know if that's a progression we're going to get in this story. I feel like it is, because it feels like that is a part of Bruce learning that he can tackle things only as there's certain things that need Batman. There's other aspects of Gotham's issues that need Bruce Wayne too. But I think that's also the argument that's why you do the whole Batman thing, because you could do a lot as Bruce Wayne, but there is a limit, and you don't even think it's necessary because you need an outlet for your fist to punch some bad guys and let out some of that rage, whatever the case may be. I'm going on a little bit of a diatribe, sorry, but I think it feeds the larger point of just Bruce's progression and whether or not we'll kind of get more of that or in this show or not. Because what was also feeding that is like Lucius was planning on buying the credit property and he was going to do some good stuff with it, kind of saying like, hey, Bruce, if you want to, you can get on this, kind of put your name and be a part of something good instead of just like burning your money with nonsense, you know? So it all plays into that. But yeah, Bruce didn't know what to do at first because you're like, yeah, you're fighting a ghost, and like, how do you really beat that? And I thought it was so interesting when he tried to punch the gentleman's ghost. So it's like, I mean, ghost kind of like, there's the whole thing of like, oh yeah, the air around you gets cold, but when he tried to punch the gentleman ghost, it like froze his hand. I also really like that chase sequence in the car when the gentleman ghost goes through the wall, but like all the money and everything he had stolen like burned up, because it's like almost like a Azure Hellfire almost type of aesthetic. But because he was dealing with a ghost, Bruce had to turn to an expert in this, and it's a character I am not familiar with. His name is Linton. What was it? Linton Midnight. He's also known as Papa Midnight. He's a voodoo magician. I did a little quick Googling, and he's a Constantine, I guess, villain. I don't know if that's the proper term. Like, what I was Googling referenced him as a rival. I don't know if he's like a Constantine villain, but he has been in like, I don't know if this is like the only other adaptation he's been in, because the other adaptations, at least of what I saw, was Constantine adaptation. So the Keanu Reeves movie where he was played by Djimon Hansu, and then in the Matt Ryan TV show that was on NBC, he was played by Michael Shaw, who I was looking at. I was like, why do I recognize that actor? He played Mercer in The Walking Dead. But either way, so I guess his character has not been adapted a lot. So it's interesting introducing him into this because, like I said, I guess kind of playing it, expanding that more supernatural side of this universe. He definitely gives you those vibes of like, yeah, he's got his own plans and he's going to take what he's like, oh, I'm going to offer you something, but I'm going to need something in the end. He definitely gave you those vibes of like, you probably shouldn't fully trust him. I mean, it all works out in the end, but who knows what kind of shady stuff he's up to, and whether or not Bruce will have any interaction with him in the future. It might be a thing of, they might not cover it. Very much like the My Adventures with Superman, we don't know where a lot of superhero stuff is in the grander scheme of things. Like, we've been introduced to some other heroes that have their connections to Superman, some that don't, but we don't know if does Constantine exist in this universe, and would they introduce him in this? Like, this is a Batman show, so there's probably certain superheroes they probably would never like bring into the show, but I could see like a Constantine being in like the level he is and just the nature of who he is, the supernatural, especially if you're introducing a character associated with him. But also the DC universe is what it is. You throw characters that have no association with a character, throw them into the mix with someone else. So just because he's a Constantine person doesn't mean we would get Constantine in it or not. It's just something to kind of think about. But either way, a whole ritual had to be performed. You had to destroy the deed to the property, because that's also kind of one of the things binding him here. But you also need a nobleman's blood, which I was wondering, I was like, would that work for Bruce? But it's like, well, they're a prestigious family, but they're not a noble family. But it's Alfred's blood they needed, because he comes from a certain family. It's like, well, why didn't you ever tell me that? He's like, because you never asked, sir. So, but it's like, oh, this could be dangerous. But it's like, yeah, I've always known that, sir. Like, I'm willing to take this risk, So they perform the ritual, and Craddock shows up and gets dispersed. Like, it was actually unnecessarily brutal how they did that when he started burning and then like the mask burnt off. You could see his skull underneath of it. I was like, that seemed extra spooky for no reason. But then he still stuck around and ended up possessing Alfred. Now, what I thought was kind of an interesting line of dialogue where he was like, hey, there's something here, a deep secret Alfred wants to keep from you. Now, I thought that was him implying like, oh, like that's Alfred trying to keep Bruce's secret as Batman. I thought that's what it was, but he specifically said it's something he doesn't want you to know. Now, I'm wondering, because it was so out of context and weird, and I think we'll circle back to it, the episode that kind of took a step back, the episode when Bruce went to, it was episode 3 with Dr. Quinzel, the Catwoman episode, where the ending of the episode is the gunshots go off and Alfred comes running. But the episode ends there. You're like, that's so weird. Why would you edit it? Like why would it be like that? And I'm like, because we're probably not going to get the full context. I mean, it feels befitting to kind of like, Alfred was kind of down on himself at the end of the episode because Bruce not going to Quinzel for help, which in the grand scheme of things is probably like unknowingly a good thing to do. But in the grand scheme of things, considering who Dr. Quinzel already was at that point in time. But for it to cut to the past and that just to be it, him hearing the gunshots and running, maybe that is just it all coming full circle. But it feels like, no, that's indicating there's more to that scene. I didn't think about it too much as like, oh, that was weird. I didn't think like maybe there's more to the scene that we'll see revealed later on. But it makes me go like, maybe that's why it was cut so weird. But we'll see whether or not there is more to it or not. But especially because like, oh, there's some big secret. So once again, I'll go back to it. More recent stuff has kind of done this, and I talk about it all the time, like Gotham, the Batman, and even the Telltale Batman game, where like the Waynes are not the greatest people, specifically Thomas isn't. So I'm curious if that's his secret, because in the Telltale games, that was a secret that Alfred had that he never told Bruce, of like, yeah, Bruce's father had connections to Carmine Falcone, and I think the Batman movie does that as well. So it might be something more along those lines, and might have to do with why they got popped by Joe Chill. So I could see that being the case. Maybe that could also it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. Like the secret he's holding about that night could associate with like, hey, maybe the Waynes weren't all that you thought they were. That your parents weren't the good people you thought they were, type of thing. So we'll see if this storyline kind of go down that route. Like I'm not saying not every storyline does that, but like I said, it has been a more recent version of the Waynes have kind of dabbled with the whole they haven't been good people. Because Thomas and Martha never really get too much time. It's just like Krypton never really gets fully explored. But in more recent years, like I said, it's just kind of been more like the Waynes aren't what you thought they were. They might not have been the golden family that you thought they were. But as I brought up earlier in the episode, the whole like moving the needle when it comes to like Bruce and Alfred's relationship, Bruce is upset at Alfred because he's like, why would you be so stupid and jump in the way? Like, you even telling me to kill you. But he's like, I can't do this without you. He's like, I know, sir. And it's like, I'm sure like there's multiple ways to interpret that, as in Alfred being like, no, I legitimately know you can't because you need me to rein you in from like going too far off the edge, but also just being like or it could just be a more emotional, like, I know, sir, I know, like, you can't always say it, but I do know how much I do mean to you. I know it's just saying how you feel is not always the easiest thing for you, understandably so, but I feel like there's multiple ways you can interpret that. And as I was talking about before too, with the whole Papa Midnight, Lenten Midnight of it all, well, he got what he wanted in the end. What becomes of that? Hell, even the Gentleman Ghost was like, hey, oh my God, it's you. Like, don't leave me with him. I'm like, what the hell is that supposed to be about? It's like, the fact is he recognized him too. It almost feels like maybe he had captured him in the past, but he had gotten out. And I was like, yeah, it's some shady shit going on that front. But we'll see what potentially could come of that in the future. Another aside of this episode is Harvey. The election isn't going the way he really wants it to. It does seem like Mayor Jessup is kind of winning. He's got a lot of newspapers on his side. And now Thorne has shown up and he wants to back Harvey, which I love the whole notion of why bet on like just red or black? Why not bet on both? And he's like, because I always win. You know, I was like, I love that whole point. And he kind of brought up, I thought, something interesting because I was kind of very much looking at Harvey as very crooked already. I think it's a thing of he's crooked to some extent. He is bent to some extent. But he still does believe in upholding justice because he's like, hey, I want to take down people like you. But then Thorne's like, yeah, your moral code, yada, yada. He was also saying, like, you have a moral code that is very slippy slidey, that God, I forgot the exact phrasing, but basically he was saying, like, there's a scale and it slides, you know. Questionable morality sometimes is kind of the point. Even though you try to be a Boy Scout, you're not. Because, I mean, all of our experience with Harvey up to this point, you could be scummy without being, like I said, bent, without being fully corrupt, but it's still like, yeah, everything is just to benefit yourself and better your own situation. You know, so I've had a more negative opinion of Harvey in this show than I think maybe was fully warranted, but, you know, obviously it's kind of a moot point because he's siding with Thorne now. Because he initially wasn't going to, because it's like, yeah, you're the type, I want power so I can take down people like you. I want to get in bed with people like you. But the problem is, he starts going down in points because the train situation, because it's like, oh, you just sat there and did nothing, because he was saying all this spiel about like, oh yeah, the train, we're going to clean it up. All the people that work here go, you know, trying to talk from the perspective of the people, even though you're kind of not with the people, because you see the people on the train just kind of look at him like, oh yeah, sure, buddy, you know. And it's like, it doesn't help that literally the cameras caught everyone else on the train getting robbed except for him, so didn't win him any points. So he ends up turning to Thorne. So we'll see what kind of favors he has to do for Thorne, and what ways will Thorne go about scratching dents back by being like, oh, let me do this for you to kind of, you know, nudge the points more your way. You know, because he's hedging his bet on both, but he probably is more likely to side with Harvey, and it's just, especially if Harvey kind of starts leaning into more winning column, it's like, well, I can always, you know, bump Jessup if I need to. We'll see if if anything coming up will warrant that type of reaction. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see how this whole mayor campaign situation plays out. I'm pretty sure it's not going to work out well for Harvey, just because of a certain picture I've seen so far. So we'll see how it all plays out. I'm excited to see what the next episode has in store for us going forward with all of this. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.